On a bright, bustling day at a local diner, golden sunlight filled the room, casting warm rays over polished tables and checkered floors. The air was rich with the scent of grilled steak, buttered vegetables, and freshly baked bread. Plates clattered against wood, silverware scraped softly, and the low hum of conversation wrapped around the space like a familiar blanket. 14-year-old Jack sat near the entrance, elbows on the table, stomach tight with hunger. A laminated menu lay in front of him, but the words blurred as his eyes darted toward plates of food being whisked by in the hands of busy servers. His mouth watered at the sight of golden brown fried chicken, steam curling off mashed potatoes drenched in thick brown gravy. He shifted slightly, fingers brushing the money in his pocket, just enough for a meal. But it wasn't his to spend. That money was for his mother. Jack swallowed hard and closed the menu. One more hour, maybe two. He could wait. He was only here to meet his friend Lucas, who was finishing up a shift in the back kitchen. As Jack stared off, his eyes wandered toward the cash register, where a pale-skinned, well-dressed couple laughed as they counted out bills. Their wedding rings sparkled under the light. Jack looked away, then a sudden sharp voice sliced through the murmur of the diner like a blade. "If you don't have money, you don't eat here." Jack's head snapped up. At the far end of the diner, the buzz of conversation stilled. A waitress stood frozen, notepad clutched to her chest. In the middle of the silence stood Rick, the owner, a heavy-set man with a scowl etched deep into his features. Towering over two elderly customers, he jabbed a finger in their direction. The couple, black, visibly shaken, stood uncertain. The woman, Morgan, clutched her scarf tightly while her husband, Henry, patted his pockets with trembling hands. Rick sneered. His voice rose, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let me guess. You thought if you sat down, ordered a nice meal, nobody would notice you couldn't pay." He let out a humorless chuckle. "I don't run a charity here." Jack felt his stomach twist. Morgan's voice shook. "Sir, we had our money. We must have dropped it somewhere. Please, just let us retrace our steps. We promise." Rick cut her off with a snarl. "Yeah, sure. Like I haven't heard that one before. First it's I lost my wallet, then it's oh please, let me work it off in the kitchen like we're in some movie." He scoffed, then added, "You people always have a story." You people. The phrase dropped heavy in the room. A few patrons shifted in their seats. A man in a suit shook his head and muttered under his breath. A woman dabbed at her mouth and looked away. Jack's nails dug into the wooden edge of the table. Henry was still patting down his pockets, desperate. "It must have fallen when we got out of the taxi," he murmured. Rick's eyes narrowed. "Oh, a taxi? So you had money when you got here, huh? And now it's just magically gone? Convenient." "Please, sir," Morgan's voice cracked. "We'll find it. Just give us a moment." Rick leaned in, his shadow engulfing them. "You hear that, folks? They just need a moment. Maybe we should all dig into our pockets and help out, huh?" he jeered. Then, in a low voice filled with venom, he added, "You think being old means I won't toss you out on your asses?" A chair scraped loudly against the floor. Jack had risen to his feet. The noise turned every head in the restaurant toward him. 100 eyes. A wave of pressure. But Jack didn't flinch. His heart thudded against his ribs, his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't think. He just moved, walking forward until he stood between Rick and the elderly couple. "That's enough," Jack said, his voice steady despite the fire burning in his chest. Rick's brow twitched. He straightened, arms crossing over his chest as he looked Jack up and down. "Oh great. Now we've got a little hero." Jack didn't move. He held his ground. "You don't need to talk to them like that. They didn't mean to lose their money." Rick's laugh was slow and deliberate.
"What are you gonna do, kid? Lecture mon respect."
"They're not trying to scam you," Jack said firmly. Rick's eyes darkened. "You don't know that." Yes, I do. Something cruel curled Rick's lips. There was a spark behind his eyes now, sharp and mean.
Oh, I get it now.
He stepped closer, lowering his voice, but making sure everyone could still hear. You feel bad, 'cause they look like you, huh? That's it, isn't it? Sticking together. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Rick smirked. Tell me something, kid. You planning to pay for their meal? 'Cause if not, I suggest you sit back down and let the grown folks handle this. A silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Jack exhaled through his nose. Then slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled wad of bills. He slapped it down onto the counter. It was all the money he had saved for his mother's birthday, the money he had spent months collecting, little by little. Doing odd jobs. Skipping snacks at school. Holding back every time he wanted something for himself. All of it. Right there on the counter. Rick stared at the cash. Jack's voice didn't shake. Now you don't have an excuse. For the first time, Rick hesitated. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he swiped the money off the counter and stuffed it into the register. Fine, he muttered. But don't come crying when they play you for a fool. Jack didn't even look at him. He turned to Morgan and Henry. Their eyes were wide, their faces unreadable. Morgan's hands trembled as she reached for his. You didn't have to do that, dear. Henry swallowed hard. We could have figured something out. Jack gave them a small, tired smile. Everyone needs help sometimes. Morgan blinked rapidly, then pulled a napkin from the table and scribbled something down. Our number. Please, if you ever need anything. Jack took it and nodded. They left quietly. The diner hummed back to life. People pretended nothing had happened. But Jack stood there for a long time, staring at the napkin in his hand, the weight of what he had done pressing heavy in his chest. He sat back down. His hands curled into fists on the table, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The cash register clicked shut, sealing away the last of his savings, the last of what he had scraped together for his mother's birthday. His stomach twisted with a slow, gnawing ache. Not just from hunger, but from the reality of what he had just given up. He knew he'd done the right thing. He knew that if he had walked away, let it happen, he wouldn't have been able to look at himself in the mirror. But knowing didn't make it any easier. Around him, the restaurant returned to normal. Conversations picked up. Forks clinked against plates. The scent of roasted garlic and butter drifted through the air, teasing him with what he could no longer have. A couple at a nearby table stole a glance at him, then quickly looked away. A young waitress, someone new, paused near his table, as if she wanted to say something. But in the end, she just kept walking. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling, exhaling slowly. Rick's words still echoed in his head. You people. You feel bad 'cause they look like you, huh? His stomach churned. It wasn't the first time he'd heard something like that. It wouldn't be the last. And he wasn't ready to go home. Not yet. Not ready to sit across from his mom and pretend like everything was fine. Not ready to face the fact that tomorrow morning, he'd wake up with nothing to give her but an apology. So he stayed. Kept his head down. Tried to ignore the way his insides felt hollow. Maybe 15 minutes passed. He reached for his phone, shifting in his seat. His elbow bumped the napkin Morgan had given him, and it fluttered to the floor. He sighed and bent down to grab it. That's when he saw it. Something under the booth across from him, half tucked in the shadows beneath the seat. Black leather, slightly worn at the edges. His brows furrowed. He stretched out his arm, fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface. He pulled it out. A wallet. Jack flipped it open, and his breath caught. Inside was a photograph, slightly faded, slipped behind a clear plastic sleeve. A younger Morgan and Henry smiled in the picture, standing in front of a small house with bright white shutters. His heart thumped hard against his ribs. It was theirs. The realization sent a jolt through him. Jack shot up from his seat, scanning the restaurant, eyes darting from face to face. But they were gone. He cursed under his breath, fingers curling tighter around the wallet as he pushed back from the table and moved quickly toward the entrance. Half running now, he stepped outside. The sidewalk was crowded, faces blurring together beneath the yellow glow of the streetlights, but Morgan and Henry were nowhere in sight. Damn it. He turned in place, looking left, then right. Nothing. The wallet felt heavier in his hands than it should have. Important. Precious. He had to do something. His mind flipped through options, heart racing. Before he could second-guess himself, he turned on his heel and started walking fast, almost running, down the block. The police station was 2 streets away. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed softly, the air colder than he expected. The officer behind the desk looked up as Jack approached, his eyes scanning him a moment too long before finally speaking. "Something you need, kid?" Jack hesitated, then set the wallet down on the counter.
I found this.
It belongs to an elderly couple, Morgan and Henry. They were just at the restaurant down the street, but I lost them before I could return it. The officer stared at the wallet, then back at Jack, his expression unreadable. "You sure you didn't just find it somewhere else?" The words stung more than Jack expected. He swallowed, keeping his voice even. "Yeah. I watched them lose it." The officer exhaled, muttering something under his breath. Then he took the wallet, flipping it open and sorting through the contents. "We'll try to contact them if there's any info inside."
What is your name?
"You got a number, in case they want to reach you." Jack paused for just a second before reciting it. The officer scribbled it down, nodding. "All right. We'll take it from here." That was it. Jack turned and stepped back into the night air. The breeze hit him hard, sharp against his skin. He shoved his hands into his pockets and started walking, the ache inside him still twisting, tight and unresolved. He told himself he'd done the right thing, that it would get back to them, that it mattered. But still, something gnawed at him. A weight in his chest he couldn't shake. By the time he got home, the apartment was dim. The scent of cheap instant noodles hung in the air. His mother sat at the kitchen table, a half-empty cup of tea in her hands. She looked up when he walked in, her brow furrowing at the exhaustion written across his face. "Baby, what's wrong?"
Jacques hésitated in the doorway.
For a moment, he thought about lying, about brushing it off. But the words caught in his throat. So instead, he let out a long breath, walked over to the table, and sat down across from her. Then he told her everything. Isabella listened in silence, her fingers curled gently around the rim of her mug. Her eyes stayed fixed on his face. The dim kitchen light flickered above them, casting soft shadows along the peeling walls, but all Jack could focus on was the quiet tension in his mother's expression. When he finally finished, letting the last of his words settle between them, Isabella exhaled, slow and steady. She set her mug down with a quiet clink against the worn wooden table. "You gave them all your money?" Her voice was calm, but there was something layered beneath it, something Jack couldn't quite name. He looked down at the tabletop, where the laminate was peeling at the corners. "Yeah." There was a pause. Then, to his surprise, Isabella smiled. A small, tired smile, but warm. "Baby, you know what the best gift is?" Jack swallowed. His stomach twisted. "I was supposed to buy you something nice." "You did." Her voice was soft as she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You helped someone who needed it. That's worth more than anything you could have wrapped in a box." Jack's throat tightened. He wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that what he'd done had been enough. But later that night, lying in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the weight of reality pressed down on him. No matter how right it had felt in the moment, the truth remained. His mother's birthday had come, and he had nothing to give her but an empty wallet and an apology.
Morning came too soon. Pale sunlight filtered through the tin-curtain, casting a faint glow across the cramped kitchen.
Isabella stood by the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal. Jack sat at the table, dragging his spoon slowly through his bowl, watching the oatmeal cling to the edges. It was thinner than usual, stretched with extra water to make it last longer. Jack knew without asking that this was all they had left. His mother sat down across from him, offering a small, tired smile. But it didn't reach her eyes. She took a slow sip of coffee, black, no sugar, no milk. Jack kept his head down, the silence between them stretching heavy with things neither of them wanted to say. Then came the knock, sharp, firm, unexpected. Jack's head snapped up, his spoon clattering against the side of his bowl. Isabella frowned, pushing her chair back as she stood. It was early. Too early for visitors. A cold sliver of unease slid down Jack's spine as she moved toward the door, her fingers hovering near the lock. "Who is it?" she asked. A pause. Then a familiar voice, muffled through the wood. "Morgan and Henry, dear." Jack shot to his feet. Isabella hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door. As it swung open, the older couple stood framed in the dim glow of the hallway, their faces illuminated by the flickering light above them. Morgan's eyes softened the moment she saw him. "Oh, sweetheart, I had a feeling we'd find you here." Jack blinked.
How did you?
"The police called," Henry said, stepping inside. His gaze moved gently across the modest apartment, the fraying edges of the couch, the stack of overdue bills peeking from the counter. "They said a young man turned in our wallet. We knew it had to be you." Isabella looked between them, then back at Jack, confusion knitting her brows. "What's going on?" Henry glanced at Morgan, who gave a small nod before turning back to Isabella with a kind smile. "Your son is a remarkable young man."
A bit of silence.
Then Henry reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded stack of bills. He stepped forward, holding it out. Jack's stomach twisted. "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I didn't do it for money." Morgan chuckled softly. "Oh, we know that, dear. That's exactly why we're here." Henry's expression grew more serious. There was curiosity there, yes, but something else. Intent. "We didn't just come to return the money you gave us. We came because we saw something tonight. And we need to ask you something important." Jack frowned.
Ask me what?
Morgan looked at Isabella, then back at Jack. Her eyes were gentle but firm. "How would you feel about a fresh start?" Jack's breath caught in his chest.
A fresh start.
The words felt too big, too impossible, to mean anything real. He looked between Morgan and Henry, searching their faces for explanation, for some sign that this was a misunderstanding. But there was only certainty in their eyes. Unshaken. Unwavering. Isabella stood frozen beside him, her fingers clutching the fabric of her sweater. Confusion tightened her features. "I don't understand," she said slowly, her voice careful, as if afraid to hope. "What are you saying?" Henry exhaled, tucking his hands into the pockets of his coat. His gaze swept across the living room, the worn furniture, the water stains spreading like shadows across the ceiling. A single flickering lamp cast uneven light along the peeling wallpaper. On the counter, an envelope sat half open, a bright red final notice stamped across its surface. The old radiator by the window rattled weakly, barely keeping the chill out. The air was thick, not just with the scent of instant noodles and weak tea, but with something heavier. The kind of exhaustion that settled into a place after years of struggle. When Henry spoke again, his voice was steady, deliberate. "We know what you're going through." His eyes shifted to Jack. "We know what you've sacrificed, not just tonight, but for a long time." Jack stiffened. "How?" Morgan smiled gently. "Because we asked." Henry nodded. "After we left the restaurant, We made a few calls. We asked around. Your friend Lucas was more than happy to tell us about you. He tilted his head slightly, studying Jack. He told us how you've been working small jobs after school. How you've been saving every penny to help your mother. How you go without so she can have a little more. How you never ask for anything, even when you need to. His voice softened. How you were willing to give up the only money you had, to help two strangers. Jack's stomach twisted again. He shifted on his feet, suddenly self-conscious, as if the walls around him had been stripped away, leaving him bare. He wasn't used to people knowing things about him, people noticing. Isabella's voice was quiet. Why would you do all this? Morgan stepped forward, her presence warm, grounding. Because, my dear, we aren't just an old couple who lost their wallet tonight. She glanced at Henry, then back at them, her lips curling into something soft but knowing. We are, in fact, quite wealthy.
Jacques blinked.
His brain stalled. Wealthy. Millionaires, Henry said simply, as if it was the most casual thing in the world.
Silence heavy in the room.
Isabella sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers curling into the fabric of her sweater. Jack barely moved, barely breathed, as the weight of their words settled over him like invisible hands pressing on his shoulders. He searched their faces again, looking for any sign this was some kind of cruel joke, but there was only quiet certainty. Henry sighed, running a hand over his chin. We don't usually tell people that up front. It complicates things. People act differently when they know. Then he met Jack's gaze, eyes glinting with something fierce, something certain. But tonight, we met a boy who didn't hesitate to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. A boy who expected nothing in return. And that Jack is rare. Jack's heart pounded in his ears. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know what to say. He had spent his whole life watching people with money move through the world like it owed them something. He had never imagined standing in front of people like Morgan and Henry, hearing them talk about him like he was the rare one. Isabella swallowed. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What exactly are you offering? Morgan's gaze softened.
A new beginning.
Henry nodded. We want to help.
A proper homme.
A stable future. A chance for Jack to go to a better school, to have the opportunities he deserves. And for you, Isabella, we can make sure you have work that pays what you're worth. No more struggling. No more worrying about how you'll keep the lights on. Jack felt his breath hitch. The weight pressing on his shoulders suddenly felt unbearable. He thought about the past few months, how he'd watched his mother lose sleep over job applications that never got a response. How they'd sat in the dark when they couldn't afford the electric bill. How he'd counted quarters just to make sure they had enough for groceries. He thought about 2 weeks ago, when his mother had finally sat him down, her eyes red-rimmed and tired, and told him that if things didn't change, he might have to leave school. Now standing here, hearing this, it didn't feel real. Why would you? His voice cracked, raw with something he didn't quite know how to name. Why would you do this for us? Henry didn't hesitate. Because we can. Morgan smiled, gentle but firm. Because we should. Jack's chest ached. He could feel Isabella's gaze on him, could hear her unsteady breath, could sense the tremble in the air between them. He wanted to say something, to ask if this was real, if this wasn't some dream he'd wake up from. But Morgan and Henry were still there.
Still waiting.
Still offering something he'd never dared believe could be his, hope. Jack's throat tightened. The weight of their offer, the sheer impossibility of it, pressed down on him like something too vast, too unreal to grasp. His mother sat rigid beside him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The hum of the old refrigerator buzzed softly behind them, a constant reminder of everything they didn't have. Of everything they'd learned to live without. The bills on the counter. The dim lighting. The cold seeping through thin walls. It had always been there, an unspoken truth neither of them had the energy to acknowledge. And now, two strangers, two people who had every reason to walk away, were standing in their cramped apartment, offering to change everything. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. His fingers curled into fists, nails digging into his palms as he stared at them, searching their faces, trying to find the catch, the condition, the reason. "You don't even know us," he said finally, his voice hoarse. Henry exhaled, slow and measured, as if he had been expecting the question.
"We know enough."
His eyes flickered to Isabella, then back to Jack, unwavering. "We know that you've been surviving, not living. That you've been carrying more than any 14-year-old should have to. That you gave away everything you had without a second thought, expecting nothing in return." He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "That tells us everything we need to know." Morgan stepped forward again, her presence warm, grounding. "We don't do this often, Jack," she said gently. "But when we see something, someone worth believing in, we don't ignore it."
Isabella let out a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper.
"But this is too much." Henry's lips quirked into something almost sad. "Is it?" he asked softly. He glanced around the apartment, the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the exhaustion etched deep into Isabella's face. "Or is it just enough?" Silence stretched between them. Jack's chest ached. His mind pulled back through the past few years, the way his mother had stopped eating full meals so he could have more. The way she had worked late shifts, exhausted and running on fumes, just to keep them afloat. He thought about how his stomach had twisted when she told him he might have to leave school. How he had forced himself to smile and say, "It's okay, Mom. I'll help. We'll figure it out." Because what else was he supposed to say? His jaw clenched. He wasn't used to things getting better. Wasn't used to people caring. Wasn't used to kindness without a price. He swallowed hard. "And what if we say no?"
Morgan smiled, a quiet, knowing smile.
"Then we shake hands, we say goodnight, and we leave. No strings. No expectation." Jack's throat burned. He turned to his mother, searching her face for something, anything, that would tell him what to do. Isabella's eyes were wet. Her breath unsteady. She reached out and cupped Jack's face in her hands, brushing her thumb over his cheek like she used to when he was just a baby. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. He let out a long shuddering breath, then opened them again, meeting Morgan and Henry's gaze with something raw and unguarded in his own. "Okay." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, steadied himself. "Okay." Morgan's smile softened. Henry nodded, his eyes glinting with something like pride. "Then let's get started." Join us, team, by the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy. Thank you.